We inhabit a world that is meticulously engineered for connectivity. I mean, we have wires, signals, satellites, constant data streams linking us to everyone everywhere all at once. And yet, if you look at the psychological data or just, look into the eyes of the people on the subway, we are experiencing a deficit of inner calm that is, well, perhaps unprecedented.
It's the great irony of our tools, right? We built this digital nervous system for the entire planet, but it seems to have completely fried our own. The material suggests we're suffering from a signal-to-noise ratio problem, but, on an existential level.
Precisely. And in the midst of this digital cacophony, there is this universal yearning for tranquility. It's a silent hum beneath every scroll and click. But today, we are not looking at a productivity hack or a new meditation app. We are staging a philosophical showdown between two absolute titans of thought regarding the best path to quiet that noise.
And what a clash of styles it is. I mean, we're analyzing the text ecstatic surrender and present presence, which pits the 13th century Persian mystic Rumi against the 20th century British philosopher Alan Watts. It's the mystic versus the rascal guru.
The central question we are grappling with is this: is true inner peace achieved through ecstatic surrender and active devotion, as Rumi suggests, or is it found through radical acceptance and non-resistance to the present moment, as Alan Watts argues?
It's the difference between the heat of the fire and the cool of the water.
That is a poetic way to put it. I will be representing the perspective of Rumi today. My argument, grounded in the text, is that peace is not some passive state you just stumble into. It's a destination reached through the transformative power of devotion, love, and a deliberate, active spiritual union. You have to move toward the silence with intensity.
And I'll be taking the side of Alan Watts. I'll be arguing that moving toward peace is exactly the problem. Peace is found through the art of letting go, accepting the suchness of reality, and recognizing that the flow of existence is already happening. You don't chase the horizon, you realize you're already standing on the earth.
So let's begin with the diagnosis before we get to the cure. I think we both agree, based on the material, that the root of our modern anxiety and really human suffering in general is the illusion of separation.
The skin-encapsulated ego, as Watts would call it. That feeling that I am in here, behind my eyes, and the universe is out there, usually trying to crush me or sell me something.
Right. We feel cut off. But Rumi's prescription for this is radical and active. The text describes his core thesis as ecstatic surrender. If the problem is that you feel small and separate, the solution is to merge with the infinite. Rumi argues that you cannot think your way out of this separation. You have to feel your way out. You have to love your way out.
Ecstatic is a heavy word, though. It implies a high state of arousal, not necessarily peace. It sounds, well, exhausting.
But in Rumi's framework, that very intensity is the bridge. He contends that embracing the beloved, whether you frame that as God, the universe, or some divine ideal, is the mechanism that leads to serenity. The text uses that famous metaphor of the reed flute. The flute is cut from the reed bed, and it wails because it's separated from its source. The music, the beauty, the peace, it all comes from that longing to return. For Rumi, yearning isn't a bug in the system, it's the feature. You use that emotional drive to propel yourself back into union.
That's a beautiful metaphor. I'll grant you that. But I have to push back on the mechanics of it. Watts would look at that yearning and call it a trap. The material on Watts emphasizes the double bind of human psychology.
Okay, so walk us through the double bind in this context.
Well, Watts argues that if you are trying to find peace, you are reinforcing the reality of your own anxiety. It's the backwards law. If I try to be calm, I am signaling to my brain that my current state is unacceptable, which creates tension. If I yearn for the divine, I am confirming that I am currently separate from it. So Watts advocates for radical acceptance or non-resistance. He draws on the concept of suchness, or tathata. This is the practice of seeing things exactly as they are without slapping a label on them. If you feel separate, don't try to merge with the divine. Just notice the feeling of separation. Don't fight it. The fighting is the separation.
But does simply noticing alleviate the suffering of a panic attack? Or the dull ache of modern loneliness? It sounds incredibly passive, bordering on indifferent. Rumi addresses the human need for catharsis. The text outlines the difference between active expression and passive acceptance. Rumi isn't asking you to sit on a cushion and watch your thoughts like a scientist. He's asking you to whirl.
The dervishes.
Exactly. The concept is finding stillness in motion. The argument here is that human beings are kinetic creatures. We have energy, we have blood pumping through us. If you tell an anxious person to just sit and accept, they often implode. The mind eats itself, Rumi says. Spin, chant, pour that energy out. The peace the dervish finds isn't the peace of a stone, it's the peace of a gyroscope. Perfect balance amidst rapid motion. You don't eliminate the self by ignoring it. You eliminate the self by exhausting it in devotion.
I see the appeal of the gyroscope, I do, but I think it misses Watts' deeper point about the nature of the struggle. Watts would argue that Rumi's approach is a form of spiritual materialism. You're still doing something to get a result. You're trading the rat race of capitalism for the spiritual rat race. The text quotes Watts on the wisdom of insecurity, this idea that safety is only found when you stop trying to make yourself safe.
But isn't stopping trying just another form of trying? I mean, if I try to stop trying, I'm still in the loop?
That is exactly the intellectual knot Watts wants you to see. He wants you to realize the absurdity of it. Rumi says, swim toward the shore of God. Watts says, realize you are water. If you are water, you don't need to swim anywhere. You float. The material describes this as mindfulness in action, or the Taoist concept of wu wei, effortless action. You stop resisting the flow of the river. Rumi's method requires this massive expenditure of energy to maintain that state of devotion. Watts asks, what happens when you get tired? What happens when the music stops?
Rumi would say you don't get tired because the energy isn't coming from you, it's coming through you. That's the nature of the union. But this brings us to the crux of the disagreement, the nature of the self, or the ego.
The villain of the story for both sides.
But how they handle the villain is totally different. Rumi's view, as I interpret the material, is that the ego is a hard shell, a crust that separates the soul from the light. And to break a shell, you need force. You need the hammer of love.
It's very violent imagery for a path to peace.
It is a destructive act. The Sufis call it fana, annihilation of the self. Die before you die. Rumi argues that the ego is stubborn. It loves its own existence. It loves to control. You can't just logic it away. You have to overwhelm it with something bigger than itself. That's why the concept of the beloved is so crucial. By focusing all your attention, all your love on an external ideal of the divine, the I naturally shrinks. You become the servant, the lover, the moth flying into the flame. The moth doesn't accept the flame, it is consumed by it.
And there lies the danger from Watts' perspective. If you set up a beloved, you are creating a duality, me versus God, lover versus beloved. Watts argues that the ego is not a shell to be broken, it's a hallucination to be seen through.
How do you see through something that feels so solid?
By examining who is doing the looking, Watts uses the analogy of the policeman and the thief. The ego is the thief running away, but it turns out the ego is also the policeman chasing the thief. It's a game of hide and seek with yourself. Watts asks, who is the I that is trying to get rid of the ego? It's the ego. It's the thief disguised as the policeman. If you try to burn the ego with Rumi's higher, it's just the ego enjoying the heat, congratulating itself on being so spiritual.
So, what is the alternative? If you can't burn it, what do you do?
You turn on the light. Watts suggests that you don't need to destroy the ego. You just need to wake up. When you realize that you are the process of the universe, the little me that needs defending it evaporates. It's not a battle, it's a realization. You can't bite your own teeth, and you can't surrender your own ego because there is no separate you to do the surrendering.
I find that intellectually robust, I really do, but it feels emotionally sterile. And this leads to our third point of contention in the material, practicality. We are talking to modern listeners. They have mortgages, traffic jams, difficult bosses, social media notifications pinging every 4 seconds.
The noise we spoke of earlier.
Exactly. Rumi's path leverages a very tangible human asset, emotion, passion. The text speaks of harnessing the yearning. Everyone knows what it feels like to want something. Rumi says, take that wanting, which usually goes toward a new car or a promotion, and aim it at the infinite. It turns the mundane into the sacred.
If I am washing dishes and I do it as an act of service to the beloved, the drudgery disappears. It becomes a ritual.
Rituals are useful, I grant you. They provide structure. But let's look at the efficiency for a stressed-out population. Rumi's path requires a redirection of desire, which takes effort. Watts' path requires a subtraction of resistance. That is infinitely more practical for the busy modern mind because it requires no extra time.
How so?
You don't have to stop washing the dishes to whirl. You don't have to conjure up a feeling of divine love while you're stuck in traffic, which, let's be honest, is hard to do when someone cuts you off. You just have to drop the resistance to the traffic. Watts' Zen approach is about the immediate, non-conceptual engagement with reality. The traffic is there. The red light is red. The anxiety is a physical sensation in the chest. Okay, that's it. You don't add a layer of spiritual meaning to it. You just subtract the layer of, I wish this weren't happening. When you stop wishing the moment was different, peace is the natural byproduct.
But can the average person actually do that? Just stop wishing? It sounds like telling a drowning man to just stop flailing. The flailing is a reflex. Rumi acknowledges the reflex. He gives the flailing a rhythm. He says, okay, you're flailing, let's turn that flailing into a dance.
And Watts would say, realize you aren't in water. You're standing on the ground and you're hallucinating the ocean.
Touché. But I think Rumi understands human psychology better here. We are terrified of the void. Watts asks us to step into the void, to accept that there is no controller, no plan, just flow. That is terrifying. Rumi offers a hand to hold. The beloved is a relational anchor. Even if, ultimately, the beloved and the lover are one, as Rumi eventually admits, you need the dualism to start the journey. You need the training wheels of relationship before you can ride the bike of unity.
That's a fair point. Watts can be intimidating because he takes away your safety net immediately. He says, the bad news is you're falling through the air without a parachute. The good news is there's no ground.
Exactly. And Rumi says, you're falling, but the wind is God's hands. It changes the experience of the fall completely. It transforms terror into trust.
However, rely on that hand of God imagery too much, and you become dependent on the poetic structure. What happens when the poetry fails? What happens when life is just brutal and ugly? Watts' concept of suchness handles the ugly better. You don't have to beautify it or spiritualize it. You look the ugly in the face and say, this is what is. There is a profound strength in that raw honesty that I think surpasses the poetic surrender of Rumi.
I'm not sure I agree that Rumi ignores the ugly. I mean, one of his most famous poems is The Guest House. He talks about welcoming every emotion, the dark thought, the shame, the malice, as a guide sent from beyond. But he welcomes them with warmth, treating them as guests. Watts welcomes them with coolness.
Detachment, clarity.
Detachment, yes. But is detachment enough to satisfy the human heart? The source material steers us toward a converging wisdom near the end. Despite the different methods, heat versus cool, devotion versus insight, the destination seems remarkably similar.
We're circling the same mountain, just from different faces. The text calls it beyond the surface. Both philosophies agree that the ultimate gateway to peace is the dismantling of the ego.
Yes, whether you burn it up in the fire or see through it with the light, the result is that the small self stops running the show. The anxious dictator in your head gets deposed.
I've been thinking about the definitions of surrender and acceptance as we've been talking. I wonder if they are just linguistic triggers for the same biological state.
Go on.
When Rumi surrenders, he stops fighting the divine will. When Watts accepts, he stops fighting the law of nature. Physically, in the body, what happens? The shoulders drop, the jaw unclenches, the breathing deepens, the adrenaline spikes subside. The fight goes out of the system.
That's a profound insight. The mechanism of peace is the cessation of resistance. Rumi achieves it by trusting a higher power so completely that resistance becomes unnecessary. I mean, why fight if the beloved is in charge? Watts achieves it by understanding the universe so clearly that resistance becomes illogical. Why fight if you are the universe?
Exactly. Rumi trusts the conductor. Watts hears the music and realizes he is the music. But in both cases, the individual stops trying to grab the baton. They stop trying to force the next note.
So the shared ground for peace described in the text is really about a shift in identity, moving from the isolated defender to the connected participant.
Yes. But the path matters because different people have different temperaments, and frankly, different moments require different medicines.
Which brings us to our closing positions. I would maintain that for the modern listener who is often numb, disconnected, and starved for meaning, Rumi's path of ecstatic surrender is the necessary medicine. The intellectual realization that I am the universe can be dry. It can easily become just another concept you store in your brain alongside your grocery list.
I see that risk. Intellectualizing Watts is the biggest trap of studying Watts. You become a Zen snob.
Exactly. Rumi demands engagement. You have to feel it. In a cold, digital world, the warmth of devotion, the feeling of being held, of loving something fiercely breaks through the numbness. It turns the black and white world into color. It gives you a reason to get out of bed, other than just obligation.
And I will reaffirm that for those who are burned out by the constant demand to feel, to perform, to achieve, even in spirituality, Watts is the antidote. Rumi asks for more love, more dance, more tears. Watts says, you have done enough. You are enough.
A peace that doesn't require a performance.
Precisely. It's the relief of setting down a heavy bag you didn't even know you were carrying. You don't need to offer the bag to God. You just need to realize your hands were clenched for no reason. For the analytical mind, the skeptic, the person who can't just believe in a deity, Watts offers a path to peace that respects their intellect while dismantling their anxiety.
The source material ends with a reflection on actionable steps and the concept of the continuous pursuit. I think this is where we find our strongest agreement.
Peace isn't a badge you earn and keep in a drawer. It's a practice. It's a verb.
Whether you are dancing with Rumi or sitting with Watts, the ego will come back. The noise will return. The modern paradox of our technology will keep buzzing. You will check your phone and feel inadequate.
You will fall out of the flow. You will start fighting the moment again. You will try to bite your own teeth.
And you must return. You must surrender again or accept again. It is a cycle.
Perhaps the most robust approach for our times is a hybrid one, a kind of spiritual ambidexterity.
Knowing when to sing and when to listen. On a Tuesday morning when you can't get out of bed and the world feels gray, maybe you need Rumi's fire to ignite the will. On a Friday night when your mind is racing with regrets and anxieties, maybe you need Watts' cool water to wash it all away.
Using the right tool for the right form of suffering.
We've presented two powerful frameworks, the path of ecstatic surrender and the path of present presence. One enters through the door, the heart, the other through the door, the mind.
But they both meet in the empty room in the center.
We invite you, the listener, to decide which path resonates with your own search for tranquility. Do you need the heat or do you need the flow?
Or perhaps a little of both.
Thank you for joining us for this philosophical showdown.